I want to give a few comments before our next presenter comes up here, because he is going to pick up exactly where Susie, who did just such a magnificent job with work, actually left off. One of the most common questions that I get, and I'm sure that you get, is how will you, or how are you, some version of that question, navigating through the political divide in what Carly last night described as a fractious time? And of course, that's a question with deep and profound implications for our educational programming in terms of how we deliver and reach people. It's questions, obviously, for the board, which came up in the last one, and it's questions with regards to our donor bases in terms of how do we think about connecting and reaching with them as we do navigate through these perilous times. I think about my own institution, the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. We have almost 100,000 donors nationwide who donate to this facility, and we raise about $85 million a year to support our operations. And of course, we have a board that we build for diversity to make sure that we do get diverse perspectives and diverse voices in the room, to make sure that we are thoughtful about how we do our work. Over the past really few years, we have thought deeply about what our educational programming should be and how we design what we do, because what we do here reaches people across the country through digital or in-person means, and it's literally millions and millions of people annually who interact with our programming. One of the core questions we thought about as we did that is how do we navigate through these fractious times? Now, we didn't just say, well, let's just do this, okay, because that could be somewhat foolish. What we did is we commissioned research. When I say research, just like Susie did, we commissioned both qualitative and, more importantly, quantitative research, where we actually specifically asked about political affiliations and what your views were on us as an institution, your views on history, and how we needed to think about educational programming as we deal with things over the next few years. And so what we're going to do at this point is share that research and results with you in the hope that it can similarly inform your work as you think about what you do to not only expand and grow your educational programming as we approach these important anniversaries, but also think about donors, boards, and other stakeholders that you may have to deal with and interact with over the next few years. Helping us in this work was a firm called Brand Federation, and the person who did a magnificent job helping us through that project, and they continue to help us with this work, is Matt Williams. And so I'm very pleased to turn the podium over to Matt at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. Like all of you, I watched Susie's presentation with rapt attention, and I had two thoughts come to mind as I was doing that. One was, wow, I wonder how these pieces of research are gonna work together. Good news is that I think they work together very well, and they complement each other, like Cliff said very well. The second thought I had as I was listening to her was, oh my God, I think I might be a good pointer. Like, I don't know. But the question of how we talk about history, how we engage people in history in a time when we know is as fractious as this one, is at the core of this piece of research, as it is in all of your minds all the time, I know. And there were two main questions that we wanted to wrestle with here. One was, how can we better understand the polarization that prevents our fellow citizens from fully engaging with history? And the second was, how can we create an environment that leads to constructive and courageous conversations that will move us all forward? That's the whole point of what we do. The good news is, while we know we are polarized in all the ways that we know so well and that we wrestle with so often, this research did reveal opportunities for folks in positions like yours to build on some common beliefs and engage people of multiple political stripes, multiple racial and ethnic backgrounds in a conversation that can move us forward. And that's what this presentation, I hope, illustrates, is that there is opportunities, there are lights that we can move toward to help move this conversation in the way that it needs to move. As Cliff mentioned, a couple of methodological points here. As Cliff mentioned, we did do a quantitative survey that had 2,400 or so respondents. We did look at people at age 35 plus. So this was commissioned specifically for Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. So the respondent profile reflects the people who are most important for this particular experience. So 35 plus, 50% of those folks had kids at home, 50% did not. 25% of those respondents were white, 25% were Black or African American, Hispanic, Asian, or other ethnicities. So we did purpose-build the methodology to reflect a broad array of ethnic backgrounds. 50% of the respondents came from the Eastern Seaboard and 50% came from other markets. They were also qualified with an attitudinal qualifier that said they had to at least indicate an interest in American history. It was less about frequency of engagement in museums particularly. It was simply to say, yes, I am interested in American history. This research was in the field in July of 2022. The qualitative research was a methodology that we call virtual communities. And what that enables us to do is use digital technology to bring people together in a qualitative setting, in a conversation, where those respondents can be from all over the country. We did 3 groups. The first group was Black and African American group. The second was Republican or leaning Republican. And the third was Democratic or leaning Democratic. So we did split out, as Cliff mentioned, some political leanings, and I'll go into that here. We also have cut the quantitative survey in the same way because we asked those questions in the questionnaire there too, so you'll see that. Again, age 35 plus. We had a mix of genders and kids and no kids, mix of Eastern Seaboard and the rest of the country. The qualifier here was you needed to be interested in colonial America era and or revolutionary America era history. And those qualitative research groups were conducted in end of August, beginning of September of 2022. So, all right, geeking out on methodology is past. Here's what we start to see when we look at the state of the conversation. The first conversation we had was, tell us about your attitudes toward history. Well, not surprisingly, history has become a bit of a hot button here. So the question is an agree or disagree question. Sometimes the debate around American history makes me feel frustrated or angry. What we see is somewhere between 60 and 70% of respondents, regardless of political stripe, saying, yeah, I'm frustrated with this conversation. Maybe it doesn't reflect my views. Maybe I think it's biased one way or another. The nature of that frustration can come from lots of different places. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there is a shared level of frustration amongst people across the political spectrum about the debate around American history. The second was a question, an agree-disagree question that said, I feel afraid for the way questions of American history are dividing our nation. So the opportunity here was to understand how people think about the linkage between the conversations and the controversy that so often surrounds history and the resulting contribution of those controversies to the divisions that people feel in the nation. Again, the numbers are fairly high. 76 to 84% on the Republican side, 62 to 72%. A little less concern in the middle, the independents. So we've got the Republicans and the lean Republicans on top, independents in the middle, and Democrats and lean Democrats on the bottom. Again, these are self-identified classifications by the respondents. But there is a linkage often between all the respondents that this debate around history is feeding the division that makes me concerned about the country. Not surprisingly, we're all on the lookout for these hidden agendas. We see information, and our first question is, okay, what's the agenda behind this information? What are these people how are they trying to spin me here? So these are quotes from the communities that we did. Remember the children's game where a person whispers something into one person's ear, and by the time it goes around the room, it's something completely different? Well, that's revisionist history, the bastardization of historical facts for social or political agendas. We're the same thing on the left. I decide whether a source is trustworthy by checking references, resources used, and any opinions expressed. Like Susie said, citing your work and showing your work becomes really important because unfortunately people from both sides of the aisle are starting to engage in this experience in a way that comes in with a very high level of skepticism and some mistrust. What's happening here? Unfortunately, but probably not surprisingly to anybody in the room, that kind of skepticism has led us all to sort of retreat into our own little information bubbles, right? And we're very kind of clear about it. We say it out loud in research settings of all settings, right? So here's somebody from the Democrat group saying, if it coincides with what I read and believe in, I trust it. Republican, I trust organizations that are fair and accurate to my beliefs. My beliefs are fair and accurate. Anything that falls outside of it is unfair and inaccurate. I don't trust people who push conspiracy theories and whose view of the world differs significantly from my own. Right? So this in our research was not a left or right issue. This was an issue that's a sad consequence of the polarization that we're seeing across the entire nation. So we're dealing with a fairly high level, a fairly high hurdle to engage these folks in a way that they trust. How do we do that? How do we engender the kind of trust that can bring them in and allow us to tell the stories that need to be told to foster the kind of engagement that we know will create more engaged citizens, better citizens? It's hard to do. Unfortunately, all this dynamic is leading people to start to tune out of the historical conversation. They're doing the exact opposite of what we want them to do. Sometimes I stop listening, watching, or talking about American history out of frustration or fatigue, agree or disagree. All of them over 50%, with the exception of an independent at 47 and a lean Democrat at 42, right? So somewhere around half of the people that we want to talk to are so affected by this polarization and by this mistrust that they're saying, I'm starting to lean out of the conversation that we're here to talk about how we get them to lean into. Right? It's a tough obstacle to overcome. So how do we do it? I think a lot of this is just kind of quantitative validation of the thing that I'm sure you feel and I felt in my gut. This is happening and this is real. How do we handle it? There is good news amongst all this bad news, so I don't want to leave you with that knot in your stomach. There are shared beliefs about history and what I want from history that you all in this room and we can build on as we engage these people in a polarizing environment. One of them is that everybody agrees that an accurate portrayal, or most people agree, an accurate portrayal of the past is told in the mainstream. Accuracy is important, right? 86%, 74%. That's a 74 in the middle, I think, 73 and 79. So while they have their own filters for deciding what is fair and what is accurate, accuracy as a concept is one that we can all agree on. I like knowing the truth about this country that I live in. I think there's so much untold or misled history about America that we as Americans need to know. We live in an incredibly complex modern world. It can be very challenging to understand why individuals and groups behave in a certain way. Learning about history helps me contextualize the current state of things. My father was in the Vietnam War. He used to tell me stories, and it made me want to know where I came from and why things in America were the way they were, right? So I want to know these things that can help me lean into these historical stories that I understand are important to my understanding of where we fit and what's happening in our nation right now. That's a shared belief. Another one is a belief in history's evolving and expanding stories. New information becomes available as a statement is an acceptable reason for our understanding of history to change. What we're finding in this research, and it was a bit of a surprise given the level of polarization that we saw and the level of some of the mistrust that we saw. And I apologize for these numbers being a little messy. I'll try to make sense of them for you. This is good news to the extent that it starts to open up the ability to engage in a dialogue as we learn more. You, better than anybody in the world, the people in this room understand that history is a dynamic practice. We're learning, we're understanding more and more every day. And what we found in this research is that people are open to that conversation as long as they can understand what that learning is and where it came from. So the majority of respondents, vast majority in many cases, are saying, yes, I understand that new information can become available, and when that happens, I want to know it, and I want to understand how it changes our understanding of the history. So that's a good shared belief. We are constantly learning new things based upon new discoveries that upend what we thought we knew about certain times, dates, and events. New findings Wow. Okay, I'm thinking, okay, what song can I sing? What song can I sing? New findings should be thoroughly checked and rechecked before they can be established as a historical narrative. Okay, granted, yes, we should check and recheck those new findings, but those new findings are available to us, and as they come available, regardless of where I sit on the political spectrum, I want to know about them. I want to learn. That's a powerful shared belief. We can build on that. Completeness is another one. The most important role of history is to tell the complete truth about the past. Well, yes, 90s and 80s in agreement with this. Again, I know what you're thinking. Okay, well, one person's completeness is different from another person's completeness. That's the difficulty here. But we're looking for things that we can build on. We can build on an agreement that accuracy is important. We can build on an agreement that completeness is important. We can build on an agreement that we can continually learn more things about history, and as we learn, it will change the way we think about our own history. All things that we can build on. Here's an interesting thing that I think dovetails with Susie's research very well. There's a shared belief in history's ability to lift us up. The question here is, how important is it that your experience with American history evoke the following feelings? And on the left, you've got a list of emotions that history might make you feel. It might make you feel curious and inspired. And 83 and 80% of the people in this survey, regardless, this is an amalgamation of all the different political beliefs, they want this from the way they engage with history. They want to be made to feel inspired. They want their curiosity heightened and piqued, right? Mournful and angry. I don't want to feel bad about this. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for my curiosity to be engaged, and I'm looking to be inspired. That's good. We can work with this. We asked people about historical moments and historical events that inspired them, and we heard some amazing things. The civil rights movement, based on what I've read, it seemed to be a time when African Americans were fighting for a common goal and were connected. Knowing how everyone dedicated and sacrificed their lives for equal rights inspires me to never miss an election. The Revolutionary War. I'm fascinated and extremely proud every time I picture a group of disparate individuals coming together to fight a greater oppressive force. That we were victorious both defies the odds and speaks to the incredible strength and power of the human will. That's inspiring. I went to the National Archives and read the Declaration of Independence. I really read it. Not just the first lines like I did in school. Wow. I stood there in awe, grateful to those men who had the courage to write it and live their words. These are regular people speaking inspired language about how they felt when they engaged in history. We can build on this. It lifts them up. So all this data, while it corroborates the polarization we know is happening, it also shows some openings where people have shared belief about the power of history in their lives and its effect on them, and their desire for that effect on them, to lift them up and can build engagement on that. So begs the obvious question, what can we as historians and storytellers do to deepen Americans' engagement in our history? How do we build on these things? We learned some things in this research that may be able to help you in your own organizations. The first was to know where you stand on trust. I need to know where my organization stands in the minds of the people I want to attract in terms of how they think of me as a trustworthy source of historical information. Now, the good news here, when we presented to Cliff and his team, is that Colonial Williamsburg stands really well. I trust Colonial Williamsburg to research the founding of America, and I trust Colonial Williamsburg to educate me about the founding of America. 71 and 70% of the respondents to this survey said, yeah, that's true. Now, there's some interesting work to be done here. I believe Colonial Williamsburg is on the forefront of advancing our knowledge in that era. Not quite as high. I believe Colonial Williamsburg accounts for and represents the stories of all Virginians. Work to be done. Knowing where you stand on trust will reveal to you and the people in your organization the equity you have to build on and the places where you need to build that equity to engage the people that you want to engage. So that's one thing we need to do. Let's know where we stand on trust when we start. The second, and again, it's consonant with the Wilkening Consulting research, Tell the stories behind the stories. You're dealing with people who are skeptical the minute they cross your threshold. They want to know where this came from. They want to vet the sources. They want to see the bibliography and the research and all that. Will they read that? I don't know. But they say they want it. And that's their response to the skepticism that they walk in with, right? But what can happen is that you can start to detail the research process and the sources and the connections that you made as experts in this field. How are we learning? What new research have we done? How does that work here? What resources are we drawing on to deepen our knowledge of history? Well, we've already heard from folks that they're open to the advancement of that knowledge happening all the time, and they want to know. Tell the story behind the stories here. Detail your process. Show how the understanding has evolved as a result of the work that you do. Highlight the credentials of the experts involved in the research, and talk about how they work to piece those stories together. Finally, inviting visitors to experience the process and the outcome. Museums are awesome at showing the outcome. That's what the exhibit is. That's what you work so hard to put together. But when you pull the curtain back and show the process that led to that exhibit, it makes that exhibit so much more credible and so much more engaging to these folks. They want to know. There are two really important outcomes that happen when you show the work behind the work. The one is that it deepens the trust that people have in your institution, because that transparency serves essentially as a surrogate vetting process for them. Like we said, they say they want to do all the research, and I'm going to look into the background of everybody I read. Let's be real, right? That's not really happening, but they're saying they want it. That kind of vetting process, or that kind of sharing of the process that you go through, can serve as vetting for the folks. They can deepen their trust in where you end up and the stories you tell. The second is it can strengthen their interest in an ongoing way in the historic stories that you're telling. Deeper understanding draws in new and repeat engagement, because I now trust this source and I love the way they tell these stories. I'll come back. The processes themselves are sources of additional curiosity. Oh my gosh, I want my curiosity piqued by a historical experience and the story, but I'm also piqued by that archaeology dig that I went through. That was amazing. I want to learn more about archaeology. And next time the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation unearths something and I see it in the press that they've pulled something out of an archaeology dig in CW, I want to go back to that because I love archaeology now. Finally, and not for nothing, stories of research and resources underscore the need for financial support. It makes it clear to people how much work goes into this and what it takes to put these stories together. If they're more engaged and more aware, maybe they're more likely to support. So telling the stories behind the stories become really, really important. Active learning. I'm also a faculty member here at the College of William and Mary, and we talk a lot about how can we engage students in the process of active learning. The sage on the stage model is kind of dead, as I stand here with a microphone on a stage. But how do we build on the insights of active learning as you bring these stories to life to your visitors, right? They're sensory. They allow students, we're talking about active learning here, to sense what they're studying, makes it easier to understand and remember, game base it, strategy skills, problem solving, critical thinking, more immersive, replicate some real life scenarios, make this come to life however you can. Use technology to do it. And then we heard a lot of the same things that Susie talked about. I want to learn the facts without spin. I want to make my own educated decisions. I like to think I have information from both sides and I can make my own decision. I'm like an investigative reporter. When a source sticks to the facts and doesn't introduce opinion at any point, I find them to be impartial. It provides the reader with the factual information and gives the reader the room to interpret what they read on their own. Just the facts, man. They're all asking for it. Now, we know people are asking for this, but it's our responsibility then to create an experience that is historically accurate, that is true to the stories we want to tell, but that comes to life to these folks in a way that they feel like leaves enough room for them to add their own thoughts to what you're showing them. Leave room for the audience to make up their own minds about meaning. That's a hard line to walk. Like Susie, I don't envy you that job. It's difficult, but it's important. If we do this, even in the polarized world that we're living in, even with the mistrust that we know these folks bring into our organizations, we believe that if we respond to the things that they're asking for in a way that can engage folks the way we want to engage them, we can create a bit of a virtuous cycle here. And it begins with feeding the desire for curiosity and inspiration that 83% of our respondents said they want from their historical experience. They want to feel those feelings, right? If we can build that engagement through a combination of authenticity and a sense of discovery, being authentic to the accuracy of the stories we tell, but also being authentic to the way we understand them and how our understanding is growing and changing over time, and also being authentic to the way we show how we went about the process of developing the research that led to the stories that we're telling, we can deepen the level of engagement. From there, we're building a sense of empathy and a connection people have to the things that happened in the past and the meaning that I can take forward into my future and into my life. That empathy can be incredibly powerful. If we build that kind of empathy, the engagement we have in a one-time experience can hopefully turn into an endless fascination with the stories that are evolving all the time about our history. Endlessly fascinating is a great way to think about the ideal state of someone's engagement with history. I love these stories. They're valuable to me. I know that they're changing all the time because I know people are constantly learning more. It's always interesting because it's always changing and it's always important. And if we do that well, the connection and the relationship builds, and the curiosity and inspiration people feel from the exposure they have to those stories grows and grows and grows, and the movement around this cycle just accelerates. So, we know we're polarized, but we know that there are some platforms we can build on, some shared desires that we can build on, and some things that we can do to build on those things. How do we avoid some of the pitfalls? I actually do have some language in here. Watch out for these semantic traps. One, terms that have been co-opted by the political dialogue suggest spin, agendas, and looseness with facts. Interpretation, narrative. I think I've heard the word narrative 5 or 6 times today. When we said the word narrative in this research, people went, whoa, narrative, oh boy, spin, there's a narrative. And you can understand where it came from. If you watch political coverage on the news, the word narrative gets said 100 times an hour. They're connecting it with spin. Interpretation. When you talk about interpretation, you're saying to them whether you mean it or not. I'm sure you don't, but their perception of that word is, you're interpreting this for me, and you've now closed off the space that I'm asking for to interpret it for myself. Terms that feel exclusive or ignore how some groups weren't full participants in colonial democracy. Again, this is about CW experience, but we think it's projectable to whatever you're doing. National DNA, collective roots, common American story. Whoa, whoa, whoa. We don't all share the same story here. Don't presume to tell me that we do. Be careful with that. The third is language that calls the visitor's understanding of history into question. We made this mistake when we fielded the research. Part of the research was testing kind of propositions, communications propositions that we might be able to put in front of people to stimulate the kind of engagement that we want. One of our propositions began with a phrase that was something like, you can't fully understand history until you understand this, 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 and this. And they went, whoa, 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 don't tell me what I can fully understand there, history guy. Come on. Don't tell me what I fully understand. Don't tell me what I can and can't do. There's sensitivity around the way we position these things. And then the final one is another pitfall we fell into in some of the wording of these propositions that we tested, was this tone that feels like it's manufacturing unnecessary drama. We wrote one, and I say we, meaning I, wrote one that was all about, you can't imagine the stakes were so high in the revolution and it never should have succeeded. And what I thought I had written a masterful dramatic interpretation of the revolution, right? What I got back was, give me a break. We know this was a big deal. We know this was a high stakes thing. We know that if we don't all hang together, we're all going to hang separately. We know. You don't need to do that. Because as soon as they sense this unnecessary drama, they don't trust you anymore. Why are you building so much drama into this thing? What's going on here? I'm not sure I believe this guy. So there are I know we know there are real semantic traps here, and there are lots of them. And it's going to force us, I think, to more objectively think about the language we tend to use, because some of the words we use in this room don't mean the same thing we mean them to mean outside. Keep your finger on the pulse. What else can we do? Well, one is we have to pay attention to this fast-moving conversation. The conversation around history is only going to accelerate as we move toward the 250th anniversary. Field regular research with your audience, focus group, tracking study, they're going to keep you on top of this rapidly shifting environment and your role in it. Create a social listening capability. This conversation is going to shift quickly. When it shifts, the first place it's going to shift is probably, for better or worse, social media. Okay? Social listening is going to keep you on top of those threats and opportunities as they arise. You need to pay attention to that. If you don't have that built into your organization, you need to build it or go buy it somewhere. Engage your staff. We know the stakes are high. Everybody has to be aware of their role in meeting these challenges and embracing their new opportunities. How are we talking about the way we engage people in the right way to the folks who are on the front line every day with your visitors? And then finally, being an active participant in the conversation. The conversation's out there, it's dynamic. People want experts to engage with them once that level of trust has been established. How are you doing that? How are you and your organization putting your unique knowledge into the world about this topic in a way that is engaging for people and exciting to people and draws them in toward you? Engaging in that conversation can reinforce how history connects with us and informs today's issues. So keeping your finger on the pulse and building the mechanisms in your organizations to do that is really, really important. So this is the too long didn't read slide. What do we do? Number one, know where you stand on trust. What equities are you building from? Where does your organization stand? How is it thought of? Are there places you need to do work? Are there places that you're leading that you need to leverage? The answer to both those questions is probably yes. Tell the stories behind the stories. Are you drawing the curtain back? Are you creating that kind of credibility that you need to create? Are you creating the level of engagement that we're seeing people ask for, not just in the outcome of what you do, but in the process of doing it? Building on the insights of active learning and bringing your knowledge to life in a way that's engaging today, leaving space for the audience to make up their own minds in a way that feels like you're inviting them in and you're inviting that conversation. Museums should be places of courageous conversations. How do you create the feeling that you're inviting people to do that? When you do that, you can create this virtuous cycle of engagement. You got to watch out for those semantic traps. There are a lot of them. And keep your finger on the pulse. Building mechanisms in your organization to make sure you're staying on top of this incredibly fast-moving and dynamic conversation. The opportunities are amazing to use the common ground that we're seeing as a platform. Not to ignore the polarization. We know it's there. We hope it gets better. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But we also know that those commonalities, the common desire that people have regardless of political affiliation for the experiences they have with history and the desire to feel that curiosity and that inspiration from those experiences are things that nobody's better positioned to provide than the people in this room. And we're excited about the opportunities if we understand the realities of the world we're living in. So thank you. And I think we have a couple of minutes for questions if anybody has any questions. I feel like I should have a giant asterisk over my head that says, I am neither a historian nor a museum professional. I don't. Oh, thank you. Yes.
Sure. So if we know that the words narrative and interpretation are challenging for our public,
Yes.
did your data actually reveal anything that describes what those processes actually are that are more fitting, more comfortable, seem more trustworthy that we should lean into if we know that narrative and interpretation are challenging?
Yeah, so what do you use instead of those words? No.
I had a feeling you would say
I
that.
know, I don't know. And it'd be irresponsible for me to tell you, no, you should use this word, and this word. I'm not sure. I can tell you why those words came up as polarization, and it's because they've been co-opted by the conversation we're having in the political realm, and there's nothing more polarizing. The catalyst for the polarization is largely political. You know, turn on CNN, turn on any of the news channels, you're going to hear people talk about the narrative. It feels like a political talk, right? Interpretation, people are taking as literally meaning you telling me what to think about something. That's what pushes them away. So I can't tell you what to say, but I can give you a little bit of texture behind why those particular words didn't resonate. Yes?
Hi, I'm Kevin from Wisconsin delegation. Just wanted to ask, we know that words can change perception and change how people react to information we're putting out there, the content we're putting out there.
Yeah.
Timing also can do that.
Yeah.
And we talked about this at the national level several times. We're very aware of this, especially in the Midwest, that between now and 1775, there's a presidential election this coming eve. And most of us come from a government agency, and politicians don't necessarily want to all be in the same room on an election year.
Right.
I guess my question is, that's a very unfortunate time to go dark as an institution or as a commission. Is there any thought on some of the responses that you've got about if people react to political years more than not, or?
That's a great question. We didn't do the research over a period of time, so we didn't field this, pre-post political engagement. I can suspect, based on the responses that we got, that you're going to be in that pinch during a political year, which is that the polarization is going to be heightened and the importance of the conversation is going to be heightened at the same time. So to me, what I would take away is let's stay on top of this, stay on the pulse, like we talked about, but also understand that going dark should not be the option here. The option here should be how can we use the principles that we uncovered with so much of the research and that Susie and her team have uncovered with her research to engage in this in the right way at a time when that engagement is so vitally important. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Hannah Lori Hine, and I'm the state historian from the Idaho State Historical Society. And I really appreciated the comments and research that you brought forth on the concept of trust. But I think sometimes trust can be this kind of thing that's hard to define and can mean something different to everybody. So I was hoping that you could kind of give your definition of that term and talk a little bit about the distinctions between trust and trustworthiness and how we can think of those as institutions and how we can maybe build on our trustworthiness in the public. So
That's a great question. I
Thank you.
think we didn't ask people to say, now define trust for us. I think trustworthiness is an outcome of the demonstration of trustworthy behavior. If we extrapolate that definition back into some of the research that we saw here, we can say doing some of those things that folks asked for can create a cumulative effect of building trustworthiness of your organization or the sense that you are an organization to be trusted, right? How do I understand how you do your research? Where did this information come from? Is it being presented to me in a way that feels like it's leaving enough space for me to draw some of my own conclusions? Is it engaging me in an ongoing dialogue that's based on continual learning and scholarship in history? Because I want that. Make this feel like a dynamic conversation where I'm learning more things, and that learning is going to deepen both my engagement and my understanding in the stories that are being told. When you do those things, the cumulative effect, I believe, is to grow that equity in trust and trustworthiness. Great.
Thank you so much. This is really incredible research.
Thank you.
I'm curious about two of your early slides where you juxtaposed both the interest in a story of history, sharing a complete story, and then I think it might have been the very next slide where the folks on our panels also said they did not want to feel mournful
Right.
or angry.
Yeah.
And I wonder how you reconcile that coming from a site of enslavement, of education, where some of the history does make me feel mournful.
Yes.
And so without coming across the word kind of spin or whitewash or
Yeah, of course. Right, right. I will tell you, it was fascinating as somebody who can't pretend to understand the impact of these stories on an African American or a black person. I can't understand that. That some of the strongest pushback we got in the qualitative research toward the mournfulness and the tragedy of these stories was from that group who said, I know how hard this was. I know how painful this is. Believe me, I know better than you do. White 55-year-old guy, right? I know better than you do. I want to understand the totality of that story because while that was an obvious element of it, there are other elements that I want to understand too. There's inspiration, there's perseverance. These were words they used. There's inspiration, there's perseverance. There's contributions that haven't been given their due, that need to be given their due. Talk to me about that too. So, yeah, it's not to deny the tragedy of those stories. It's just not to solely focus only on those.
Good morning, Matt. So not to put you on the spot, I'm Carly Fiorina. Matt, Christy Coleman of the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation asked a very important question in our last session, which was about how do you talk to a board that may be in a different place than your audience or that may be struggling with some of these same things. And here at Colonial Williamsburg, we've had Matt talk to our board many times, several times, and some of those conversations have been a little difficult, and you've done such a masterful job at that. I wonder if you could share some of how you did that with our board, because it may be helpful to Christy's question and others.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
I think part of it goes back to Susie's answer to that same question, which is that there's data here. There is knowledge here that we can ground in. We can ground that conversation in what we know. And it in some ways that knowledge may comport with what we believe ourselves, in some ways it may not. But let's start there. Let's start with what we know. Let's give grace to the points of view in the room, because that board may represent a microcosm of the different points of view that you're going to have to deal with when you go out in the public. And when you give that space, you can have a conversation based on knowledge that doesn't feel like it invalidates points of view on the board, but can create an environment where people feel like they're being constructively engaged in a conversation designed to come to a collective point of view about how this organization moves forward. Because we want the same thing. At least that was the feeling in the room when we were sitting in the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation board. You know that these folks want the same thing. They want the deep engagement in the amazing stories that this place can tell. Because if we tell them effectively and in a way that pulls people in, we will create better citizens, more engaged Americans, a stronger country. Everybody wants that. If we start from that foundation of we want the same thing, we know some things about the world we're dealing in, now we can create some space to have that conversation that gives grace to all the points of view in the boardroom. We can move forward together. It won't be easy. There were tough moments in some of those conversations. You want that, I think, as long as those tough moments come on a foundation of knowledge and shared desire outcome. Thank you all.